Hello, and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast. I am Felicia Martin, the Vice President of the Ncaa Eligibility Center, and also Interim Senior Vice President of Inclusion, Education, and Community Engagement. Throughout my career, I've made decisions that are student-athlete centric. I've always been a believer in the power of education, the importance of integrity, and opening the doors of opportunity when it comes to professional endeavors. Leaders must educate themselves through programs, strategic relationships, and career experiences. As a woman of color, I've found that the right exposure and strategic networking can be instrumental in progressing to executive-level leadership positions. We've created the Ncaa Leadership Collective to provide exposure for our industry's most talented minority administrators and coaches. The Ncaa Leadership Collective is a database that houses career profiles of ethnic minorities who are ready to step into major leadership roles. Qualified athletic administrators and coaches can create their professional profile in the collective and keep it up to date as they progress throughout their careers. Presidents, chancellors, conference commissioners, and athletic directors have access to each profile in the collective, so they can build a comprehensive list of candidates for opportunities within their respective organizations. I encourage people to visit ncaa.org/leadership-development to get more details on the Ncaa Leadership Collective. This is an incredible resource for our industry. Be well.
Greetings, this is Ty Brown and welcome to the One Question Leadership Podcast, where we highlight executive and organizational leadership. Be sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram at 1Q Leadership. Our guest today is Geoffrey Mearns. Geoffrey is the president at Ball State University. Greetings, Geoffrey. Thanks for joining us.
It's great to be with you, Ty.
I'm happy to have you on. In terms of every time I can talk to a president, I feel like my credibility goes up a little bit. So happy to have you on. You've been in that role at Ball State since 2017. You also spent time as president at Northern Kentucky University. You worked in administration and on faculty at Cleveland State University for a total of roughly 17 years in higher education. Background, right, as a practicing attorney, you're a trial lawyer for more than 15 years, administrative positions in the Department of Justice, as well as with private law firms. What did I leave out there in terms of the wealth of experience you have?
No, that sums up my career. I had the good fortune to be a trial lawyer and now to have the opportunity to participate in the education of the next generation of women and men who will lead our country.
Right, which is important. And, I'd be remiss to say, knowing the nature of the audience who listen to this podcast, to not point out that you ran track in college at Yale. And also, you are in a number of different positions with regard to the NCAA. I wonder if you can tell us which specific position you're on, because your bios don't lead with that, but it's important to us and the people who listen to.
Sure. So I happen to presently serve as the chair of the MAC President's Council. And also I presently serve on the NCAA Board of Governors and also on the NCAA Division I Board of Directors. And I've served now for nearly 2 years on the Division I Infractions Process Review Committee. So I was a competitive athlete in college and thereafter, and so enjoy the intersection of education and college athletics.
And now that you bring that up, I'll start with this first question here. When I talk to athletics director and people who actually work in college athletics, I tend to couch, and I got this from President Dr. Linda Livingstone at Baylor, that the purpose of an athletics department is to enhance the academic mission of the university. And so someone like you who is involved at the intersection of all that, I wonder if you can talk a little bit about that when you talk about why is it important to have athletics on campus such as we do here in the United States?
Well, for me, I know it was a significant experience for me in my own personal development. And I think a lot of what I've learned about leadership was being a part of competitive athletics teams. You learn about the importance of hard work. You learn about the importance of elevating the team. You learn about discipline. You learn how to manage disappointments. You learn how not to let the lows get you too low or the highs get you too high. And so I think those are the kinds of lessons that apply to your life and to your work. And so for me, it was such an integral part of my academic experience at Yale that I'm hopeful to provide that opportunity for about 450, nearly 500 student athletes here at Ball State.
Right. And my experience, and I'm biased because I was also a student athlete, is that school without athletics, right? University without athletics is still a university and still doing important work. But I think it brings something to the people who aren't student athletes also, right? The students who aren't, the faculty, the number of people on campus.
That's right. It generates pride in your alumni base or in the community that surrounds you. You build collegiality among the student body. You know, one of the things I talk to the broader student body about, sometimes they'll say, well, why should I go watch the football team if maybe they're not having a great season? Or why should I go watch the gymnastics team? And I say, well, but if you have a friend who is in the debating club, you go to support it, even though you're not a participant yourself. But because that person is a fellow student, you support them because you care about that part of their experience on campus. So come support our student athletes because they're members, broader members of the student body, irrespective of whether they win every game or not.
Yeah, it's important. And it's also a rallying point. If I was raising money or wanted to talk business that had nothing to do with athletics, there are still athletic contests where we could get together because now we're in this environment where we can talk about things that possibly could be beneficial to the university.
Right. Which is why I think as we face some of the challenges that Division I athletics in particular is facing right now, it's important for us to understand that it needs to continue to be integrated into the broader college academic experience. Certainly we need to make some changes, but I don't want to lose that aspect of the nature of college athletics as well.
Your background when you were at Northern Kentucky, here at Ball State, your heavy experience in strategic planning. And there's an aspect of that is involved in the whole university and specifically in college athletics in terms of planning for the future. And I want to ask you a couple questions about strategic planning. Like when you're deciding to create a strategic plan, is the process rooted in providing solutions to existing problems, or are you imagining a future that you want to attain and working backwards from that future, right? Or is there a mix? Or tell me about that part.
It's a mix, but I think it's more the latter. So
okay.
You can't ignore, as you're going through the planning process, you can't ignore the existing problems because that's where the vast majority of your team sits every day, right? They're on the front line in the classroom or as advisors or in whatever role they may play. But your job as the leader is to provide them with a vision of what can be, not just what presently is and how we solve those problems, but what can be. And so, as I say, you can't ignore the present challenges because if you do, you're going to seem out of touch with your team. But great leaders have the capacity to acknowledge that reality, yet describe the future potential and articulate a pathway to that brighter future. And that's why, Tai, just one other thing I would say is I've always felt it was vitally important for me as the president to lead the strategic planning committee. I'm surprised when some presidents delegate that responsibility to somebody else because it seems to me it is so fundamental to your responsibility as the president or the CEO to chart that long-term future that you can't really delegate that responsibility. You need to be involved in the process in a very meaningful way.
Yeah, it's interesting. So thinking about the idea of a strategic plan and then embark on putting a team together based on what you just said, right? You have to convince the people on this committee to not be weighed down by the problems of the past, right? And you just said, the problems they are currently facing. Talk about that aspect of broadening their perspectives and saying, hey, I understand what's happening now, but we're trying to plan for the future.
So I think also it's very important who you put on that committee.
To have the capacity to do that type
Exactly. Of thing. Who have the capacity to join you in that vision of a long-term brighter future and have credibility, day in and day out credibility with their colleagues. The other thing I would say is for us, it was the process of setting long-term goals and then articulating intermediate steps on that pathway to that long-term goal. And to do that, you have to engage in a very consultative process. So I believe in forming small strategic planning committees. Sometimes at universities, I see there's a tendency to have a committee of 25, 30, 35 people. You're not going to be selective and strategic if there's that large of a group developing the final product. But you certainly have to have a very extensive consultative process so that people on campus feel like they've had a meaningful opportunity to have their voices heard, their perspectives shared with that committee.
I was listening to something and they talked about strategy versus vision, right? Where strategy is kind of where to play and how do you win where you're playing, where vision is kind of deciding which game to play to get to a specific future. So I wonder about the balance of those two when you talk about higher education and creating a strategic plan.
Yeah, so I read a quote recently. It actually goes all the way back to Abraham Lincoln, who lived through some tumultuous times and led our country through some extraordinary challenges. And what he said at that time, and I don't get the words exactly right, but in essence, what he said was we have to disengage ourselves from the present and have the ability to think in a free and new and creative way. So for me, it's as I say, that vision of a brighter future, of a different future. And so, as I say, you have to acknowledge the reality, but you have to find people who are willing to disengage with it and not just simply try to do better those things that they're already doing, but maybe to stop doing some of those things so that you have the resources and the time and the energy and the focus to do some new and different things. Those strategies that are critical to the future. Of course, you're familiar with Wayne Gretzky, the famous line, he doesn't skate to where the puck was, he skates to where the puck's going to be.
Is there an aspect of that where you mentioned incremental, the strategy is comprised of incremental, projects that lead to a specific vision? How deep in the minutia do you get? You identify this incremental aspect of the strategy and where you want that to be, and then does somebody take it and execute it once you start executing a strategic plan, and then they plan out all from project management, right? The work packages all the way down to the minute detail. Tell me about that aspect of it.
Yeah, you got it. So our strategic plan was pretty high level. It's long term. We stated goals all the way to 2040. We identified then those critical strategic imperatives that we wanted to implement over the next 5 years, again, at a very high level. But then the next phase of the process is driving that strategic plan down through every college and every division and ensuring that every division and every college has an implementation plan that aligns with your strategic plan. There's no way at the highest level, at a strategic level, we had the capacity to define the specific tactics that would get there. We don't have that expertise. We don't have that time. But we have a system that we check in every 6 months with our deans and our vice presidents to say, where are you on the process? What progress have you made in implementing those tactics that will ensure we're successfully implementing those strategic imperatives? So you have to have the discipline to drive it down through the entire organization.
What is the pre-work before you start getting into the high level planning? Is there a information gathering for a year or two, surveys, or what was involved in that, the 2040 plan that you mentioned?
So we didn't have time, and with the fast pacing change of education, you can't wait 2 years. Right. But yes, so what we also, after we formed the initial committee, we created about 6 or 8 different data gathering task force. And we said, we want to know more information about our demographics, or we want to know more information about this topic. And we set them out and we gave them 45 days to come back and deliver a report that we could then use as part of our planning process. And then, of course, we were out on campus on a regular basis, conducting surveys, having focus groups, having planning sessions so that people could contribute to the process in meaningful ways. But you have to move quickly in this day and age.
Yeah, right, exactly. So there's an aspect I'm learning in this MBA program, and I may be quoting the name wrong, but I think it's called Moore's Curve. And it's, you may come up with a product or a disruption product like an iPad or iPhone, and you have a competitive advantage for a while, and then people start copying your competitive advantage. And then businesses get to a point at that curve where it's either continue to optimize what we're currently doing or innovate and then start another curve. And I wonder about that in college athletics when you talk about the unique value proposition of an institution. Are we constantly? I don't think neither one of them is wrong, right? Neither is right or wrong. But are we trying to optimize where we are, or are we constantly trying to figure out how to innovate and be disruptive and make sure our university basically stands out amongst the rest?
Well, I may not get this right, but I think there was a famous pitcher, Satchel Paige. I think he was, the famous quote he had is, "Don't look back because there always is somebody coming after you."
Exactly, right.
So you have to constantly be in that phase of both executing and performing your strategic plan, but willing to test those ideas to ensure that your continued innovation stage. And so in higher education, that hasn't always been our strong suit. We have traditions that we honor, but I think we're in an era in terms of higher education where constant innovation and change will be the hallmark of successful institutions.
Right. He spent 5 years at Northern Kentucky and also implemented a strategic plan there. You're working on, I guess we're at 5 years here at Ball State, right? 5 or 6 years. And so I wonder about that phase in your time in almost 20 years in higher education. What have you seen in terms of innovation that you think has been, whether it be locally where you have been or just in the industry in general, have been kind of game changers for the industry or for the individual institution who created this disruption in higher education?
Yeah, so here at Ball State, I had the good fortune of inheriting an institution that was a creative, innovative place. It's one of our enduring values. So, for example, we have immersive learning, which is really an extension of what many institutions refer to as experiential learning. But this is a problem-based, interdisciplinary team of students who are working under the direction of a professor, often for an entire semester. It's called immersive because that might be the only course that students will take in that particular semester. And they're working on a community-based problem in partnership with one or more community organizations to provide a potential solution to the problem that organization or the community is facing. So it's immersive in the sense of the students are all in, and it's immersive because the university is immersed in the community. So that's one example. And just a couple of days ago, we're moving pretty quickly in the area of esports. I don't know much about it other than that's the wave of the future. But So we had the Ray Hall, Letterman, Lanigan racing team on campus in our esports arena to announce a partnership with a Formula One racing team.
Wow.
to provide scholarships for our students. Because esports is not just about the students who are at those consoles playing those games. It's about all of the other aspects and professions and disciplines that surround it. Very much like sports, right? The athletes on the field are the ones we all see, but there are marketing people, business people, lawyers, technical people. So we're doing that in a very comprehensive and aggressive way in the esports environment. And one of our most famous graduates, David Letterman, was here on campus just a couple of days ago to celebrate that announcement. And he was talking about how progressive and innovative the university is. So we're trying to do it across many disciplines in many different ways.
Yeah, that's exciting. When those things happen, when that type of partnership comes, as the person who led the strategic plan, do you see where that ties in? Like, oh, this ties in perfectly with one of the aspects of what we want to do.
Correct. So it's interdisciplinary, it's student focused, it's anticipating where the student interests will be in the future. But then going back, tied to just something you asked before, is I don't know much about esports. I don't play it, but I know enough to know that there's a high level of student interest. So really my only responsibility, the only credit I get was to spot the issue, identify a great leader, the dean of our College of Communication, Information, and Media, Paige Turner, provide her with some resources to build the arena and to hire somebody to lead the program. And she and that program director have run with it at 110 miles an hour. So, again, going back to your idea of whether we get into the details, no. My responsibility is to help identify an opportunity, identify the resources, and identify the right people to execute.
Yeah, that's excellent. I'll ask you a couple questions here before we wrap. The first one is, I guess, how often do you revisit the strategic plan and make adjustments for the ever-evolving world? You touched on it a bit, but I wonder if you can give us your process of revisiting.
That's right. So again, our strategic plan lays out long-term goals to 2040, but has specific strategic imperatives that we want to successfully implement to make measurable progress to those long-term goals in 5-year increments. So the first 5-year period will conclude in 2024. So we'll do a comprehensive review of the plan in 2024. We'll still work towards those goals, but we'll be maybe new strategic imperatives. But then also every 6 months, we're doing a comprehensive assessment of, are we making progress with the implementation of those strategic imperatives? The last thing I would say is, when the pandemic hit, one of our board members said, 18 months ago, you developed that plan, but heck, the world may have changed. So we did an exercise as a leadership team. We went through every strategic imperative in our current strategic plan and said, in light of the pandemic, is that strategic imperative more important, equally important, less important, or irrelevant? So we did a comprehensive review as a group. We elevated some priorities, and a small number of them we said, hey, in this respect, the world has changed. This is no longer relevant, and we took it off the table.
Yeah, that's interesting. I wonder, in those 6-month reviews, does somebody own that process? I don't imagine you get the whole group together, but is that somebody was like, oh, this aspect here might need to be updated, and then they come back to you and, work? How do they?
So the way it is, all the vice presidents, when I arrived here, there was a vacant chief of staff position in the president's office. I converted that position to a chief strategy officer. So her responsibility is to help us design the strategic planning process and to monitor the implementation. So every 6 months, all of the vice presidents need to send their updates to her. She puts them into a comprehensive format, and we share that with the whole leadership team. And we do sit down and say, Tai, how are you doing on this? Are you making enough progress? Is there help that you need from this other vice president? So it's not a long conversation, but we try to identify where there's some gaps, maybe where there's some obstacles. So we do it collectively. But my chief strategy officer is the principal point person to ensure that we're staying on task every day.
Yeah, that's important. And I ask this final question, and then we'll wrap, and it ties to your responsibilities on these NCAA involvement committees and things. This is your second presidential stint. You're almost in higher education for 20 years. You spent almost 20 years as a lawyer too. And so you come in with a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge. And I wonder about, on these committees, your approach to processing the amount of information that's coming at you. And if that information doesn't get to you by Tuesday, by Thursday, all the information could have changed. So I just wonder about processing that information and how you use your approach to like this strategic planning and strategic management to what you do in those committees for the NCAA.
So being relatively new to those committees, I think it's important for me to listen and learn, right? We've all been in organizations where the new person on the committee starts talking too early, and they don't really have an understanding of the history or the culture. So I've been spending a lot of time more listening to the group and asking questions and trying to read the materials and figure out the issues that are important, figure out the dynamics of the group. And then, as you say, trying to stay current with all of the information that's coming out. And boy, these are times of rapid change in college athletics. So as I say, I'm still on the very steep learning curve right now.
Which is important to learn and listen and learn. Well, President Mearns, this has been an excellent conversation, and I really appreciate you joining us here on the One Question Leadership Podcast.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation, Tai. Good luck.
That was President Geoffrey Mearns. He is the president at Ball State University. And of course, I am Tai Brown with One Question. And keep in mind, the role of a leader is to create and maintain an environment that people want to be a part of. And as always, be better tomorrow than you are today. This episode of the One Question Leadership Podcast is produced by Spades Media Group, solving problems using creative leadership.